Hello everybody and welcome back to the HLTCO YouTube channel. I appreciate that the last video I recorded I said that it wasn't going to be a Crystal Palace centric channel, and it is not. However, this next video that I am recording will actually focus on another Crystal Palace story. Sometimes they are like buses and they come all together at once. You know, I have to appreciate that there will be a large number of the people subscribed to this page that aren't necessarily interested, but I feel as though the potential of Wilfried Zaha returning to Crystal Palace on loan from Galatasaray for the upcoming 24-25 season is a big enough story that, from a Palace fan point of view, I feel it deserves its own video. And there are a number of different views that you could take in relation to this particular transfer story. I'm not sure how I feel about it. You know, I touched upon it on the podcast that I recorded this morning, not to be too much of a hard sell, but I do a daily Palace pod on Patreon alongside a daily general football podcast. Quick little plug there. But I spoke about it for a few minutes on the pod this morning because there are, and I would imagine, you know, you could go as a cross-section across our fan base and get 100 different opinions as to whether or not it's the right or wrong thing to do to bring Wilfried Zaha back to Crystal Palace. The nuts and bolts of this deal, as broken, I believe, by Sam Wallace in the Telegraph yesterday evening at about 10:30, is that the Galatasaray hierarchy are very much open to the idea of Wilfried Zaha leaving Istanbul. You know, it has been an experiment that hasn't necessarily worked out for them. A big money arrival, and one who I think performed passably in the 23-24 season. You know, they were in the Champions League, he scored at Old Trafford, he's played his part in, you know, a title, and that in itself is obviously something that he will be happy about on a personal level. But if you look at the finances involved, it's quite clear that for him to justify the wages that he's pulling in from Galatasaray on a weekly basis, he is going to have to perform to an elite level. And I think at the age he now is, that probably is something that is not in his future. Quite how Crystal Palace fit into this, I'm not sure, because you only need to rewind 12 months and we were offering a 4-year contract on £200,000 a week. Now, there were plenty of people outside of the Palace bubble who looked at that and said, you must be off your heads. You know, you've got a guy here, the wrong side of 30, production levels in terms of goals and assists are only going to go down, and yet you're offering him a long-term deal on astronomical money, never before seen money at Crystal Palace. He was the previous highest earner at the football club. I think when he left for Galatasaray, his wage prior to his departure was £130,000 a week. We were looking to bump that up to 200 grand per week. You know, we did a mural on the side of a house outside Selhurst Park. There was all sorts of talk about potentially naming the Category 1 Academy after him, about naming the new main stand after him. He was going to be given the keys to the castle. And instead, he decided to go to Turkey, apply his trade over there, because he wanted to realise his dream of playing in the Champions League. And I think after a fair bit of soul-searching, a little bit of back and forth, and, you know, undeniably, the uptick in form that we experienced once Oliver Glasner came to the football club at the back end of last season, people made their peace with it. You know, it wasn't ideal. It would have been great to see Wilfried Zaha return from Manchester United after that failed experiment, where of course he was Sir Alex Ferguson's last signing as Manchester United boss before David Moyes stepped in. We all know that story by now. You don't need me to go over it in granular detail on this particular video, but he ended up on loan at Cardiff. That didn't work out well for him. He returned as the prodigal son, and he carried the football club for a number of years, you know, being that lightning rod, that person that we look towards, that moment of spark that you're always relying upon. And he produced it time and time again. You know, the emotion that Crystal Palace fans have for Wilfried Zaha is something that is almost impossible to encapsulate and explain to those outside of the Palace bubble, because he came through the academy, because he grew up in South London, because he made his first team debut when the club were in financial strife, because he scored a brace away at Brighton in the playoff semi-final to take us to Wembley, because he won the penalty at Wembley to get us into the Premier League where we remain to this day, because he has scored so many important goals throughout numerous relegation battles or potential relegation battles. He has been that guy for years. But then you take the decision to leave for Galatasaray with that huge amount of money on offer from Crystal Palace, and it sours it somewhat. There is no part of me that can try and explain that away, and to try and do that, I think would be disingenuous of me at this stage. And I'm not going to lie, I did feel stung by it. I don't think there was a Palace fan who didn't, because we would have understood it. You look at Michael Olise, for example, going to Bayern Munich. No one begrudges him that, because we can all see his talent, we can all see the undoubted potential that he possesses, and we know that he can go on and realise those dreams. Similarly, when Wilfried Zaha made that move to Manchester United, no one begrudged him that. We were going into the Premier League without our star man, and we knew that we were going to have to try and fight our way through without him. No one wished him ill, because it was a huge step for him at a formative stage of his career. But taking the option to go to Galatasaray when we were putting the crown jewels, as it were, in front of him, I think it has soured many people's views on Wilfried Zaha. And you look at the situation with Oliver Glasner now. I mean, plenty of people have suggested that he wouldn't fit the tactical model. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. He has proven to be extremely positionally versatile over the entirety of his Palace career. He's played on the left, on the right, as a 10, as a striker. He can do it. I think there are question marks over whether or not his ability to play minutes is on the wane, because he has been regularly injured throughout his entire time in Crystal Palace colours because of how often he was kicked. But I do think the departure of Michael Olise, the arrival, admittedly, of players like Daichi Kamada and Ismail Assar have gone some way towards plugging that gap. It stands without reason that a fully fit, a fully motivated Wilfried Zaha would be an asset for Crystal Palace in the upcoming season. But whether or not you want to rip that particular plaster off again and have a second homecoming, some people could argue it's almost a third because of the fact that he came back on loan initially and signed permanently, I'm just not sure it's a PR win for the club. It will be in certain senses, and I appreciate there will be a large number of people watching this going, damn, it's Wilfried Zaha, let's not be ridiculous. Anyone who says otherwise should, be burnt at the stake. And that's why I wanted to record this video, because it is rather a messy topic of conversation. There will be some who are sworn off it and think it's a back step that is almost a cardinal sin, really, given the momentum we've got, given the transfer strategy with the younger age profile, the resale value. But on a loan deal, I believe, there are a multitude of different figures out there. I'm not sure exactly which one would be spot on, but the most recent one that I've seen, and the one that I put most store by, suggests that Galatasaray are looking for £9 million in total for the year. That includes a loan fee, it includes a portion of his wages, and obviously you then, in a year's time, potentially come back to a situation where there is a option to buy inserted as part of this deal. Again, it's heart versus head, isn't it? I'm sure, and a huge part of this will undeniably be that Steve Parish and Dougie Freedman obviously hold Wilf in very high esteem and regard, and like him as a person, want him around the group. But ultimately, my call on this, and it might sound a little bit as though I'm, obsessed with the new, but my ultimate call on this would be whether or not Oliver Glasner wants Wilfried Zaha, and not whether or not Dougie Freedman or Steve Parish do. Because, the last thing I want is to upset the situation that we have now, with a new coaching staff and a new manager who got a fantastic run of form out of this team at the back end of last season. If Oliver Glasner isn't fully bought into the idea of bringing Wilf back, then I am also not fully bought in. Similarly, if Oliver Glasner thinks Wilfried Zaha, Crystal Palace legend, bring him in, there's the attacking firepower that we need, albeit in a short-term basis, but I can work with that, I can get him playing, it's something I want, then I am 100% sold. And I am, fully prepared to seesaw on this depending on what Oliver Glasner thinks. I don't think it's worth, as a fan at this stage, allowing your heart to rule your head too much, because we have a manager in Oliver Glasner, and I don't think I'm being outlandish in saying this. I honestly believe it. We have a manager in Oliver Glasner that we have never had throughout this 10, 11-year stay in the Premier League. He is someone who is extremely tactically well thought of. He has got this team playing superb, free-flowing, high-energy, high-press football, and I wouldn't want to jeopardise that. So ultimately, if Wilfried Zaha is open to it, if the finances make sense, and if Oliver Glasner crucially wants to do this, then I would be behind it. But I still, as an individual, remain somewhat torn. And if indeed Oliver Glasner is in the same boat as I am, and I dare say other Palace fans, in umming and ahhing and not being sure exactly what we should be doing with Wilfried Zaha, then I would suggest it's probably not a good use of resources, because you do risk upsetting that relatively delicate balance. You know, the ecosystem that is currently growing. Players like Adam Wharton, Daniel Munoz, Jefferson Lerma, even JP. You know, JP has had a fantastic run of form at the back end of last season for the French Olympic squad. And, you know, a huge part of that was Michael Elise. You could look towards Wilfried Zaha and suggest that you've got a player there with a newly invigorated frontman who could play a key role in creating chances and being an active cog within a very successful system. But I think a lot of it comes down to Oliver Glasner's gut feeling, and that is my overall stance on it. Of course, we will see how it develops across the next 2 or 3 days. It may well be that Sam Wallace has got the wrong end of the stick, and you know, it's one of those stories that doesn't go anywhere. But I do think there is probably, again, there is no smoke without fire quite often, and I do believe there would be a certain part of the Palace hierarchy that would be banging that particular drum. And if Oliver Glasner signs off on it, then I am also fully aboard that train as well. But it depends ultimately on what the Austrian wants. And, you know, I am aware as well that you could potentially put too many eggs in the Oliver Glasner basket, but I am a fully paid up member of his particular fan club at this point in my life as a fan. And, you know, we will see how it goes from there. So I just wanted to record this video today to get a bit more of an expanded view on my perspective with the Wilfried Zaha situation and the potential of him coming back. As always, if you please could give this video a like, push the subscribe button, leave a comment below, let me know what you think, whether you happen to be a Palace fan, whether you're just a neutral that has watched this, got to this stage and have an opinion on it. I would love to hear from you. And other than that, I will look forward to speaking to you again in a few days. Cheers.